And we're live. Welcome back. Good to be back here today. Today with me, my name's Russ. And of course, we've got Matt and Joe is with us today. Joe, we're almost through 2020. We're getting near the end of this year. How are you feeling as we draw to the end of the year here?
I'm excited for it to be over, to be honest.
So as one of our HR gurus, sort of the head of our HR team here at Pay Factors, have you found 2020 to be a particularly challenging year?
Yeah, you could say that. It's been, obviously going into 2020, everyone had plans and sort of what you thought was going to happen. And then, and in these parts anyway, March hit and everything sort of came to a halt. So it's been challenging. Everything sort of pivoted very quickly. And it's really changed sort of the day-to-day of HR and what we're doing. Because we're sort of dealing with COVID 24 hours a day, it feels like.
I know. It's been like a complete sea change. And I know, Matt, you're hearing a lot from our clients about these sorts of things as well. And I thought, given the end of the year coming here, we thought it might be kind of fun to chat a little bit about some of these big changes. And if you read any of this stuff online, like if you read, websites like HR Morning or Forbes or anything like that, you get these sort of high level sort of strategic predictions about what's happened to HR in 2020 and how it's going to change. And they see things like, remote work as a permanent feature, or it's all about culture and nurturing your folks and worker well-being and things like that. But of course, it's a lot more tactical than that, right? And how do you deal with it? How do you respond to that? And to your point, Joe, like all the planning's kind of going out the window. Matt, are we sort of hearing that from our clients as well, that it's just been a complete sea change to how they tackle HR?
Yeah. We've never covered this before, Russ, but am I allowed to cuss on this podcast, or is that
you can here? Sure. You like cussing's fine. PG-13.
I'm just kidding. I just wanted to paraphrase for what the HR folks are, sort of feeling this year, and that it's been a difficult year. And Joe will, mention that, and we'll reiterate it, I'm sure, throughout this podcast. It's been interesting, to say the least, and from what I've been hearing from our customers, that one of the more, again, I'm going to say interesting parts about all this is I've been getting, myself, my team, the rest of our client-facing team, we've been getting questions we never would typically get, even if it's not necessarily with, COVID in the question or, asking about something specifically there, but a lot more questions about maintaining culture, communication, perks and benefits and stuff like that, training and onboarding. Normally people come to us looking for, market data, survey management, building reports, how to maintain salary structures, all that sort of stuff that we can still do, total reward statements, all that sort of stuff that's right in our sweet spot, but then asking us about all these additional things that are really taking up the majority of their time right now.
Yeah. I think that's, sorry, Russ. That's exactly right. I think every other HR person I've talked to is feeling the same way. And I'm not surprised that our customers are reaching out to us, even if we're not necessarily that's not traditionally what they would come to us for, right? I think in this role in HR in 2020 in COVID times, everyone's just sort of trying to figure out how to do it on the fly, right? And what could be sort of remote onboarding when you've never had to deal with it, or contact tracing, or where do you buy supplies if you have to have an office that's open? There's just so many. COVID touches so many parts of HR. And, I think one thing I've learned this year in particular is how important it is to have a network of other HR folks just to, bounce ideas off of like, or you come across this situation, or what do you think here? It's really important to build that community. And I'm glad that Pay Factors has been able to fill some of that void, right? Because I think everyone's just looking for validation, and because no one knows, right? No one's gone through this before.
Exactly. I think there's so much things that are falling on the shoulders of, HR leaders and HR team members, because they're just new things that have to happen in organizations, and where else do you put it? So it doesn't surprise me at all to hear folks reaching out with all sorts of new and exciting, questions and challenges they need answers to. And Joe, I'd love to hear from you more about this sort of thing. So obviously you have a lot of friends and peers who work in HR in different companies, different industries. Of course, you're on the front lines yourself here. What are some of the challenges you sort of had to deal with this year that you sort of expected? And I think the the thing too to keep in mind as we go through this is, I think most of us kind of thought this was a short-term thing. Like, okay, a couple of weeks, a month, maybe 2 months. We're closing in on the first year, and hear some people talk about it. It could be quite a bit longer before everything is quote back to normal, whatever that means. So, what are some of the big things you've had to tackle this year, Joe? And how have you guys thought about it? What are you hearing some other folks tackling? What are those big challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think so many, right? And you can almost think of it as a timeline of how everything sort of happened, right? So, it comes and everyone's like, all right, well, we'll close down for a couple of weeks, or, everyone just needs to shelter in place for a little bit and then we'll move on. And then, a couple of weeks turns into a month, and then it's the summer, and now it's, now it's winter, and we're coming into 2021. But that initial sort of wave, and, I have a number of colleagues sort of outside of the company, in different industries, industries that got hit hard, construction or hospitality, especially, right? They went through, their first round of layoffs or furloughs, right? Right when it hit, the world shut down. They don't need construction sites open. They don't need people manning hotels. And then they, again, sort of thinking that it was going to be short term, but then summer comes and business isn't back. So they have to do another wave. And so I have a lot of colleagues that the continuous wave of these furloughs and, layoffs, it's sort of every few months, as this continues to drag on, and, sort of looking into 2021, I think construction in particular, especially in the Northeast, right, when you can't do a ton outside all the time, that can get particularly, difficult. And, the thing with layoffs, right? I mean, hopefully no one has to go through it, but there's just so much preparation, and it really is, it's just so time consuming, right? There's the pre, kind of planning and talking to the managers and figuring out, and it's, you're talking about people, right? These are heavy conversations. And then the actual execution of doing it. And to be honest, for companies that were not built sort of remote first, which I think most companies weren't, it's really hard to pivot and think about the logistics of, when you would historically bring someone into an office and, have the conversation. Now you have to reach out to them remotely and get them on a phone call. And how do you do that with multiple people? And there's so many more logistics and so many more things to do. And then dealing with sort of the people that are left, right? And that's all done remotely as well. And it's just, to pivot your entire sort of how you interact with people, especially in those difficult times, it is really hard, right? I mean, I think of, I've been at other companies that have had layoffs, many years ago, and, the people that are left sort of get together and you sort of mourn together, right? There's that piece of it. And so that it's hard to do remotely, and it's hard to help from an HR perspective when you can't see people.
So Joe, that's really interesting. I mean, you mentioned a couple things that I think most folks don't really think about. Obviously, it's never nice to go through a layoff or a furlough. But that idea to be able to get back together, the folks left behind and mourn and get through that process together, that must be so difficult, to try to do that remotely. And Matt, that just gets me thinking about, how do you engage that workforce and keep folks, when you think about employee retention and everybody's remote now, how do you handle that, Matt? What kind of things are we hearing about clients trying to kind of keep people engaged and keep people feeling like they're part of something?
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing that's coming up a lot now, and it's sort of how do our clients maintain a culture, throughout a pandemic when everyone's, for the most part, working virtually, and it's really tough to do. It's, it's hard for HR to do that, even if you just have remote workforce normally. It's like, how do you keep those people who are at home engaged and, feel like they're a part of something? But then, when you know that people are going through hardships right now and sickness and that sort of stuff, deaths in family, and then you have the furlough and layoff aspect of it, it makes it a lot harder. People are trying, from what I've heard from the meetups that we've done, calls that I've been on within our community, within our platform, people talking about communication being key. and, giving employees more insight into how the rest of the business is being run, because you catch some of those conversations. Like, I know for myself, if I'm in the office, sure, I'm talking to people on my team, but a lot of my conversations are, they're with you, Russ, or they're with you, Joe, or, they're talking to our sales team, and we can hear about some of the wins that are happening around the office. And that's really, really tough when you're working remotely and everyone's at their house. You can feel like you're enclosed all the time. So like some of the things that I've heard our clients doing is, putting out company newsletters, emailing out newsletters each week, giving updates, highlights, big wins for the company, progress that's being made in other areas, new hires and that sort of stuff. People doing things like virtual, sort of shifting from the normal perks and benefits that you might get from being in the office, the free coffee, snacks and that sort of stuff. And trying to do more virtual rewards and stuff like that, maybe even doing like gift cards and company swag and that sort of stuff. And then, some of the great things I was hearing I was just about to say when we were in the thick of it, but I shouldn't say that because we're still in the thick of it. But when COVID first hit and, some organizations, people who had warehouses, plants, that sort of stuff, where people were going into the office or into the plant, into the warehouse, some organizations, they were doing meals for those families. If they had a cafeteria on site, maybe once a week they'd pay for a family meal to go home. You have someone going into the office and maybe there's another parent at home that's taking care of everything else for the family and possibly even working virtually, that, a dinner a night a week from the company is going to solidify that bond and, tie them to the organization a little bit more. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's what I want to ask you about this, Joe. And I think that's a great example, Matt. Like, the world just changed overnight, right? Virtually. And how do you sort of rethink how you interact with your workforce? I mean, how are you guys thinking about it in HR at Pay Factors, and what are you hearing some of your colleagues saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt touched on a lot of sort of the struggles, right? It is important to reach out and communicate. And, here at Pay Factors, one of the examples that Matt gave, we did start a weekly newsletter. And, part of it is giving information about sort of what's going on in HR. Part of it is highlights. We're doing some interviews with folks in different departments so they can get to know each other virtually. If we have a new hire, we're highlighting that. We're doing some fun things, maybe like a good recipe or those sorts of things. Just try to bring back some of that sort of water cooler talk that you would have, and Matt was talking about, right? You would just run into people and you would sort of get a sense of how the company's doing, and that can get lost. So, I mean, I think in terms of retention, it's really hard, right? Everyone just went home overnight. You're just sitting in your office at home or wherever you are in your home, if you have an office, just working. And so it's really important to take the extra minute and, if it's a Slack message or, an email or some way to just say hi to people that you might not otherwise talk to, right, in your sort of daily work habits, right? I think it's really important to keep those connections because people want to be part of something. They don't want to just do their job, right? So I think the retention part of it is to somehow recreate a different type of community, right? Not just, you'll walk out of your bedroom and you walk into your new office, turn on your laptop and, work for 8 hours and then log off, right? Like people want more than that. So, I think every HR department, everyone I'm talking to in HR is sort of struggling with what that looks like. And really it's so dependent on the people that are at your company, right? Some people want a lot of the virtual happy hours and sort of the fun, in quotes, kind of fun things that you would do sort of in real life after hours. And then some companies are like, oh, I don't want to have to be on another Zoom after hours, right? That it becomes, becomes more of an obligation as opposed to, some sort of bonding. So I think you really have to key into who your employees are and what they value to sort of know which direction to go in. And I think this is also the time where it's okay to not no, and to try things and for it to be okay to be like, oh, we tried that and no one was really interested in doing that trivia night. But maybe people are really interested in doing, a recipe swap. Right. So I think it really depends. And I think, companies and HR professionals really have to give themselves sort of, some leeway and some latitude to try and to fail. I think it's more about the effort than it is necessarily about the execution in some instances.
Well, you mentioned something
Joe,
really interesting. Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
I was going to say that you mentioned something interesting as well, too, Joe, when you're talking about, trying out these different things. I think something to keep in mind is it's not a one size fits all sort of thing for, any particular company. What I would suggest is, you look at your different departments and the roles and sort of inherently like different functions, you see some of the same types of personalities in a sales job or in a customer service job. And, I think you could try out with these different groups, different types of things to keep people engaged. And it's going to vary throughout the organization. It's not just like trying one thing with all of your company. It's try it out with, meet with the department head for, one particular department, try something out there, and then maybe you could try something out with another group and see if it works there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely not a one size fits all. And you're right. Different personalities gravitate towards different parts of an organization, right? So you're 100%, right? Like a social hour might work in one department and another department might be like, absolutely not. I don't want to do that. So yeah, it's a great point, Matt.
Well, you're both hinting at how important it is to feel like you're part of something beyond just the work, right? And one of the things, Joe, you and I are just talking offline about some of the things that we're doing pay factors, and we've got a bunch of hiring going on and all this, and I was just thinking, like, how the heck do you onboard remotely, Joe? Like, how do you even tackle that challenge of trying to get people involved, engaged, ramped up, feeling like they know who the people are at this company? Like, how do you even start with something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, for us, in particular, we never onboarded remotely. Even if we had a remote employee, we would always have them come into the office. And so we would get that face-to-face time, like at least, for the first couple of weeks. So it's been a challenge, right? And I think every time we onboard someone remotely, the team is sort of like, how was it? Can we do anything better? What are you missing? Right. So we're trying, right? So I think it's about personal touches sort of along the way. Making it as seamless as possible for them. We're very cognizant of the fact of making sure they have all of their hardware, their computers, that all of whatever they need to be set up that day. And we're very we communicate with them so much up, prior to their start date to make sure that they understand where they need to be, who's going to call them, what time they're going to call them to, be able to log into their computer. And to set them up with different departments and get them sort of the information they need. And then to really just check in, right? I think from an HR perspective, a lot of times from onboarding, it's, you onboard them, they move on to their department, and you might do, a 30, 60, 90-day check-in potentially. But, they're usually only coming to HR if they need something, right? In those first couple of months. And I think it's important from an HR perspective to sort of recognize that it's a very different experience, and they're not going to know people here, right? And so you are someone they know, right? You've met them, even if it's virtually. So it's important to sort of keep, kind of check in and just say, hey, we remember you. I think that helps. But it's really, you have to be very organized. You have the logistics of onboarding someone is very remotely is very different than doing it in person. So, I would recommend speaking with the department heads of whichever department you're bringing on to make sure that they know what the schedule is and sort of they know where that new person is at all times, as the onboarding is happening. And really, I think it's really about, again, just communication. I think we can always be improving, and I think we have over time, and I think we will continue to. So I don't know if I have the magic answer, but I think everything that comes down to kind of this overnight remote workforce is communication and organization, right? It's really about logistics.
So I think that's sort of interesting, right? Because it sounds like, every aspect of HR just gets a little harder, or in some cases a lot harder, right? With all the the response to COVID. And I know, Matt, we're hearing the same thing from our clients, but so, and I know a lot of our listeners are comp folks, right? Who are obviously, partners of HR, but maybe not directly on the front lines of some of this. And I don't know if we always appreciate, not only is everything just that much harder for you guys, but then additionally, you have these new COVID related policies and changes and things you have to keep track of, create, manage. Like, tell us a little bit about that. Like, this is a whole new job requirement, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And I think, it obviously is very, we are a SaaS company, right? So we can and did shut down our offices and everyone works from home, right? So, but, companies that can't shut down, whole new jobs are being created, like full-time contract tracers, right? So if someone, even in our situation, if someone needs to come into the office because they need it, to meet with IT to get something fixed on their computer that can't happen remotely, we had to create this whole process because, there has to be tracing happening if someone, unfortunately gets COVID, right? So, and we have to stay up to date on sort of local, federal, state guidelines about COVID and about all the laws that are coming out around COVID, right? I mean, I think, the new, there's been changes to, the CARES Act has created a lot of changes, right? So it's, not only are you focused on sort of what's happening in your state, your city, wherever your office is, if you are open, it goes beyond that, even if you are fully remote, because it just affects so many things, like the new emergency, the EFMLA, again, I mentioned the CARES Act, but it changes, there were 401k changes, there were FSA changes. There's just so much to keep track of constantly. And the information is just coming in, right? I mean, I can't even tell you how many emails you get about it every day. And then you have to, I'm on the CDC website and it's just, you're constantly looking for new information because there's just so much of it coming at you, and you have to figure out, what applies to who, is it federal, is it states? You have people in different states. There's just so much to kind of, take in. You're sort of drinking from a fire hose. So it really has shifted, I think, priorities in a lot of instances. And really, I've talked to a lot of friends and colleagues in HR at other companies, and it's like, I can't even remember, I keep hearing this over and over again. I can't remember what I did, what my day-to-day job was before COVID. It just, I mean, I've literally heard that from many, many people in HR, and it's just, it sort of rings true, because you're so focused on this that, you're sort of like, oh, well, what did my day look like before COVID? Because I'm spending so much time thinking about it now.
Yeah, it does seem like it's 90% of your workload now, right? And Joe, you made the point that as a fully remote organization or mostly remote organization, you're able to sort of reduces the amount of stuff you got to keep track of. But man, I know we hear from clients who are actually essential workers that they've got to stay open, or at least they want to, because maybe they're in restaurants or hospitality or whatever, and then there's this whole other list of stuff, right? And Matt, we're seeing like dozens of new jobs being created and having to be filled and figured out for these sorts of things, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think we saw that starting once openings started happening, I guess, around like April or May, we started getting requests for new jobs that surveys never had before. We've never had in our database before. We were able to add it into our peer database, which was good. But like Joe mentioned, the contact tracer, that's just one position. There's like probably 5, 6, 7 other new roles that are just being built or being created rather at organizations to ensure that you're compliant with everything. And Russ, you mentioned like restaurants and retail locations that, generally they'd probably have, 3 to 5 roles at one particular store or restaurant. And now they're adding on new positions from there. So They need to figure out what that role actually entails, what the duties and responsibilities are, what they're supposed to pay these people. And, we're doing it on the fly from scratch, basically.
Yeah. And I know we're running a little out of time here, so I wanted to ask you one more question, though, Joe. And, we just talked about, and most of what we discussed today is all the additional complexities and additional workload on the HR team. But also there's this additional stress on the employees too, right? Their world's a little bit changed. What kind of things do we have to deal with as HR people? Like, what are you thinking about every day? Like, okay, what do I have to watch out for my employees? What are we not thinking about for them? Because so much of the world has changed for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'll be honest, I think a lot of what I'm thinking about from an employee's perspective is, mental health, right? I mean, this is hard, right? Everyone is going through a really hard thing together. And, if I'm thinking about, okay, so now people who thrive being around people are now at home, like that's not good for their mental health. And, maybe they have a spouse or a significant other that lost their job. And now, there's financial strain and children are home, or like just the sort of, how do you, employees are people, right? And I don't, maybe this is, I don't know. I don't want to come off too hokey, but, I care about my employees, right? So like, I want to make sure like their whole being, right? So, we've been trying to sort of reiterate, what services are available, right? There's our EAP, we have mental health that goes along with that. Sort of just making sure that people, know what's out there, know they have support, and know that the company supports them in whatever they're going through. So, I think it's also really important for everyone, everyone to take a breath, and managers to know that, sometimes other things are coming up in their world, in their employees' world. And so you have to kind of give them a little bit of leeway to get their job done, but to also understand that it might be off hours. It might be a little bit, might take a little bit longer, just because there's so many other factors that are happening to employees right now that's really outside of their control.
I think and it's easy to forget that everything just got more complex for them too, right? Like, we have employees obviously going on a maternity and everything else, but even maternity is complicated, right? Even going through that whole process now, having a baby at this time is just crazy, right? Or they're trying to get married, or they're trying to do something. All those things just got more complicated and stressful to them. And then you add on top of that, kids aren't in school like they used to be, and all that process is going on. And then what if, God forbid, someone gets COVID exposure? Then what do you do? And how do you still make them feel like they're not, some kind of like leper, that kind of thing?
Well, right. There's that. And not to interrupt, but I mean, you get someone who has exposure, then, okay, so, then they're in quarantine, and there's so many use cases, but like, if they have a family and then their whole family has to quarantine, or what if, God forbid, their child gets it? And, it's sort of, it makes you rethink of sort of your time off policy, your sick policy, all of those things, sort of need to be loosened up to accommodate, right? So there's just, again, COVID really is touching sort of every aspect of HR, and how we think about employees and the employee experience. And then, obviously the company, right? So you have to balance everything. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
no. That's a great point. And this just made me want to ask you one more question, which is, normally, what's the normal number of times a year that, typical HR person kind of reevaluates an HR policy versus what's happening right now? Because I kind of feel like you guys are having to reevaluate and invent policies like every third Wednesday, but that's probably too infrequent. Like, is it really different? Is it like almost every other day now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. Yeah, I couldn't even tell you. I mean, I think I've probably looked at our particular policies more this year than I ever have, just to make sure, right? Does something need to be tweaked, or, are we sort of just going to let that slide, right? I think there has to be, obviously business has to be run, but again, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I think there has to be some leeway there. So yeah, looking at policies way more often than you were, I think is very true in COVID times. And again, specific to COVID, I know from our perspective, and I know from others in other companies have similar are feeling the same thing. The kind of looking at the COVID stats and what, we're in Massachusetts. So what has Governor Baker said this week, and what phase are we in, and what can we do, and who can come in and who can't? And so that is literally changing every 3 days.
Yeah.
It felt like it, I think it feels like it's slowed down, a little bit in the last couple of weeks. But, certainly over the summer and well into the fall, it felt like every other day there was another press conference and another change to how Massachusetts was sort of what they were allowing. And to keep up with that is just a full-time job, it feels like.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Joe. And as we wrap up here, I'd like to ask for one little prediction from everybody on the episode here. So Joe, I'm going to let you go second. So you have the option to hear what Matt says first, and then you can disagree if you want, or agree with him. So Matt, are you ready? So we kind of opened this whole episode with like some of the things that the experts, air quotes, are saying about things and remote work being sort of permanent. And I think we've talked about this in the past, Matt. But given now, I think at the beginning of this whole thing, everybody kind of felt like, hey, this remote thing's working pretty well. It's going to be something everybody's going to do forever. And of course it is. I mean, a lot of organizations are doing great, but at the same time, we just spent a large part of this particular discussion talking about how tough it is for people who they can't get together, and how much we sort of miss that connectivity and being part of something. So what do you think, Matt, now that we've been doing this even longer, do you think that, majority remote organizations is the way of the future, or do you think people are going to start to miss it? And when everything settles down on this whole pandemic thing, people are going to be excited to get back into the office? What do you think?
Yes, we have. I feel like we've answered this question before, but it makes sense to keep asking it because we keep learning new things and things keep changing. I think, things are never going to be the same, whether it's, predominant or not. I don't know. I feel like it'll be much more common once we get through COVID that you'll see organizations where it's possible, of course, to work remotely. We've talked about a few cases where it's not, where there will be many more remote workers, more flexible remote work policy. I feel like you brought up, we've been talking this entire time about all the hard things that are happening right now and what Joe and her peers are trying to figure out how to keep people engaged, onboard people and stuff like that. But the thing is, they're working through that stuff right now, and they're creating new policies and new training guidelines and all this sort of stuff. So we're investing a lot of time right now into getting this right. And I feel like maybe some companies will look at that and be like, all right, well, we invested a lot of time and also possibly some money too, in getting IT to get remote employees up and running with all the equipment they need. People are getting their spaces set up, and we proved that it's working. So let's take what we've learned over the last 8 months, and, that will contribute to a more healthy lifestyle for our employees, more family time, that sort of stuff at home, and flexibility. I don't know what pay factors holds for the future, Joe. I mean, you want to answer that question right now? I know my kids want to know if I'm ever going back to an office.
What do you think, Joe? Is this going to be the way it is, or is it going to go back? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I echo sort of Matt's thinking. I don't think it'll ever go back exactly to the way it was. I don't think companies that were 100%, kind of butts in the seat will go back to that. I mean, I'm sure maybe there will be some, but I do think it will open up, I think probably more split work weeks, go into the office a couple of days a week, work from home a couple of days a week. And I think Matt brings up a great point. Every HR is doing the work now, right? We have to figure out how to make a remote workforce work. So I find it hard to believe that everyone's just going to throw that out when this is over. So I do think parts of it will be here to stay. And no, Matt, I'm not going to answer the question.
Sorry.
Nice try,
Everyone's
though.
listening now. See, that's the problem.
I know.
Awesome.
No, yeah. So but I do think, and I'll just say one other thing, and then I know we need to wrap up. But I do think that there will be a lasting effect on how kind of remote workforce changes how we recruit, and that might be a different comp and coffee. But I do think parts of it are here to stay, though, is my answer.
I think you're both correct. And Matt, I also think I heard Joe agree to come on again for another Comp and Coffee. So that's excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us today. And, now you've heard what we think, but what do you think? Let us know. Send us an email to coffee@payfactors.com or tweet us just directly at payfactors. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks for joining us for Comp and Coffee. Comp and Coffee is a PayFactors production dedicated to the compensation community. We welcome your feedback. Send email to coffee@payfactors.com, tweet us at PayFactors, or share your thoughts in our PayFactors community tile. Until next time, keep your coffee hot and your data fresh.